What if living past 90 wasn't discovered in a lab, but practiced for over 1,000 years by monks who never heard the word biomarker? While you're counting calories and running to the pharmacy, monks on a remote Greek peninsula were eating a soup linked to near-zero rates of colon and lung cancer for decades. This isn't legend, it's documented, studied in clinical cohorts, measured in blood panels, published in peer-reviewed journals. Today, 20 of them. Number 9. A fermented food that dissolves blood clots in your bloodstream. Modern medicine didn't figure this out until the 1980s. Monks had it for centuries. Number 1. The food I saved for last activates the exact cellular pathway anti-aging scientists are racing to unlock. No prescription, no lab, just a monastery kitchen. Want ancient longevity secrets like this every week? Hit subscribe now. Let's get into it. 20 foods ancient monks ate that kept them alive past 90, ranked from remarkable to life-changing. Number 20. Jujubes and lotus seeds, the breakfast that outlives generations. At the Shaolin temple, this isn't random porridge, it's laba kanji, 8 treasures kanji. Cooked once a year for the laba festival, eaten for centuries as a daily staple. This was deliberate fuel, chosen for what it did inside the body, long before anyone could explain why. Jujubes are loaded with cyclic AMP and triterpenic acids that fuel cellular energy and immune function. Lotus seeds contain something almost nobody's heard of, an enzyme called L-isoaspartyl methyltransferase. It repairs damaged proteins before they pile up as cellular debris. That protein damage is one of the actual hallmarks of aging. Traditional use: a handful of dried jujubes and lotus seeds, simmered into rice or oats for 15 to 20 minutes. Eaten warm, first thing in the morning. Number 19. Sea vegetables, the ocean's answer to inflammation. Kombu and wakame show up constantly in Buddhist monastery cooking, especially in Shojin Ryori, the devotional cuisine of Zen Japan. Every broth traces back to these two seaweeds, not coastal convenience, a deliberate choice for what it did to the body over decades. They're packed with fucoidan, a compound shown to fight inflammation, prevent dangerous clotting, and slow cellular aging at a molecular level. Research shows it blocks the exact process that lets artery walls get irritated and start forming plaque. And the alginates in sea vegetables form a gel in your gut that binds toxins and heavy metals, helping your body clear them out. Traditional use: a strip of dried kombu simmered into stock for 10 minutes, then removed, or a spoonful of rehydrated wakame stirred into miso soup. Sea vegetables got forgotten because you can't patent seaweed, but it's still doing what it's done for 1,000 years. Number 18. Shiitake mushrooms, the immune system's silent architect. Shiitake shows up everywhere in Shojin Ryori, simmered into broths, stir-fried with tofu and greens. For centuries, monks built meals around it. Not a flavor ingredient, essential. Nothing in a monastery kitchen is arbitrary. Every ingredient earned its place through generations of trial and error. What made monks sick, what made them resilient, what let the elders outlive the young. Nobody could explain shiitake biochemically, they just knew it worked. Modern science finally caught up. Shiitake is rich in lentinan, a beta-glucan that acts almost like a signal for your immune system. It binds to receptors on macrophages and natural killer cells, the cells that hunt down infections and abnormal cells. But lentinan doesn't crank your immune system into overdrive. It supports immune surveillance, keeping your defenses alert without tipping into chronic inflammation. That distinction matters because what shortens lifespan usually isn't a weak immune system. It's one stuck in constant low-grade alarm. Shiitake has a second trick, a rare compound called erythodenin, found in almost no other food. It speeds up your liver's ability to clear cholesterol by converting it into bile acids, a faster off-ramp for excess cholesterol before it builds up in your blood. 2 mechanisms, 1 mushroom, immune calibration and cholesterol clearance, working quietly in every bowl of soup a monk ever ate. Traditional use: dried shiitake, rehydrated in warm water for 20 minutes, then simmered into miso soup or broth. Save the soaking liquid, it's loaded with the same compounds. Monks never wasted it. Shiitake got forgotten in the West because nobody could sell it as a pill. It's just a mushroom, still doing exactly what it did 1,000 years ago. Number 17. Probiotic dairy, the gut health monks understood before anyone had heard the word microbiome. Fermented dairy shows up across 3 completely different monastic worlds: Tibetan yak yogurt, Mount Athos sheep and goat feta, Mediterranean cultured milk, different mountains, different languages, different centuries, same conclusion. Not tradition for tradition's sake, a functional choice, repeated independently across cultures with zero contact with each other, exactly the kind of pattern that means something real is going on. Fermented dairy is loaded with live lactic acid bacteria, lactobacillus, streptococcus, that colonize the gut and support your intestinal lining. But here's the part most people never hear. Fermentation breaks milk proteins into bioactive peptides. Some function as natural ACE inhibitors, regulating blood pressure through the same pathway some prescription medications target. Traditional use: a small serving of plain live culture yogurt or aged sheep's feta, eaten daily. Consistency over quantity. Number 16. Wild edible greens, the forgotten produce aisle nobody sells. In longevity regions like Icaria and Mount Athos, monastics don't rely on a handful of cultivated vegetables. They forage fennel, chicory, sea beet, dandelion, sometimes over 70 varieties in a single season. Not foraging out of scarcity, a deliberate pattern of biodiversity modern agriculture, quietly abandoned for convenience. These wild greens contain up to 10 times the polyphenol content of standard red wine, a number that surprises most people who assume wine is the polyphenol gold standard. Compounds like apigenin and luteolin directly inhibit NF-κB, a transcription factor that switches on inflammatory genes throughout the body. Suppress that pathway, and you lower IL-6 and TNF-alpha, two of the most consistent drivers of age-related chronic inflammation. Traditional use: a mix of bitter greens, dandelion, chicory, arugula, lightly wilted in olive oil with lemon. A daily side, not an occasional garnish. Wild greens got forgotten because you can't put a barcode on a hillside, but they're still offering exactly what they offered 1,000 years ago. Number 15. Pickled olives, the fasting food that doubles as medicine. On Mount Athos, olives are eaten on both fasting and non-fasting days, one of the only foods that crosses that line freely. That alone tells you how central they are. Not just something to eat during restrictive fasting. A deliberate choice, because of what brine fermentation does to the olive itself. Traditional brining preserves high concentrations of two powerful compounds, oleuropein and hydroxytyrosol, while populating the olive skin with wild lactic acid bacteria. Hydroxytyrosol is one of the most potent natural antioxidants ever measured. Its job: protecting LDL cholesterol from oxidation. That matters because oxidized LDL, not just high LDL, is what actually triggers arterial plaque. Pickled olives interrupt the first step of vascular disease before it starts. Traditional use: whole brined olives, unpitted, eaten a small handful at a time, alongside bread, or on their own as a fasting day staple. Number 14. Umeboshi, the plum so sour it rewires your energy system. Pickled salted plums, aged in Japanese Zen monasteries for months, sometimes years, before they're ever eaten. No shortcut version. Patience is baked into the process. Not just a preserved food to survive winter. Chosen deliberately for its effect on digestion and energy, something monks could feel long before anyone could measure it. Umeboshi contains 6 times the citric acid of lemons, plus substantial malic and succinic acid. Those organic acids boost your mitochondrial citric acid cycle, the core engine your cells use to produce energy, clearing lactic acid faster and smoothing ATP synthesis. And umeboshi's intense acidity stimulates salivation and gastric acid secretion. That matters more with age, since stomach acid production naturally declines and can quietly impair protein digestion and mineral absorption. Traditional use: 1 small umeboshi plum, eaten alongside rice or tea, never more than 1 or 2 a day. They're intense. Number 13. Chickpeas, the legume that feeds bacteria you didn't know you had. A staple on Mount Athos, stewed slowly with wild mountain herbs into a simple, unassuming dish. Nothing flashy, just a bowl that shows up again and again, week after week, decade after decade. Not repetition out of laziness. Repetition because the food was doing something the monks' bodies clearly responded to. Chickpeas are dense in resistant starch and soluble fiber, carbs that skip digestion in the upper gut and arrive intact in the large intestine. There, gut bacteria ferment them into short-chain fatty acids, especially butyrate. Butyrate isn't a byproduct, it's the primary fuel for the cells lining your colon, and it's essential for keeping that intestinal barrier sealed. When that barrier weakens, Inflammatory compounds leak into your bloodstream, quietly driving up inflammation for years with no obvious symptoms. Traditional use: dried chickpeas, soaked overnight, simmered for an hour with wild or dried herbs, never canned, always slow-cooked from scratch. Number 12. Silent lentil soup, the meal monks aren't allowed to talk through. On Mount Athos, lentil soup isn't just a dish, it's a ritual, eaten in complete silence, to keep the mind on the act of eating, not conversation. But it wasn't only about mindfulness. The lentils themselves were doing something specific inside the body, something that had nothing to do with silence at all. Lentils are notably low in methionine, an amino acid most animal proteins are loaded with. Sounds like a downside. It's not. Restricting methionine downregulates mTOR, one of the most heavily studied targets in aging research. Suppressing mTOR mimics many of the same life-extending effects as caloric restriction. It reduces mitochondrial oxidative stress and switches on genes tied to cellular stress resistance. A low methionine lentil soup may be quietly triggering the same biological switches scientists are now chasing with experimental longevity drugs. Traditional use: lentils simmered slowly with olive oil, garlic, and bay leaf, eaten in silence, no rushing, no distraction, just the meal. Number 11. Feast day fish, the omega-3 monks only ate on purpose. On specific liturgical feast days, Athonite and Western Benedictine monks break from their plant-based fare to eat fresh, locally caught fish and octopus, not a daily habit, deliberate, occasional, tied to the calendar itself. Not random indulgence on a holiday, a calculated exception, built into a system that otherwise avoided animal protein almost entirely. This fish delivers a concentrated dose of long-chain omega-3s, EPA and DHA. These fats integrate directly into the phospholipid bilayer of your cell membranes, improving how well your cells respond to hormonal and chemical signals. In heart tissue specifically, EPA and DHA stabilize electrical activity, directly lowering the risk of dangerous arrhythmias while lowering triglycerides and reducing inflammatory eicosanoids. Traditional use: fresh, simply grilled or stewed fish, eaten only on feast days, never a daily staple, always a deliberate exception to the rule. Real quick, a lot of people ask me this: how do you know you're getting the real version of this stuff, not the diluted, processed version on a regular supermarket shelf? Good question. Here's the problem. Most of what's sold as olive oil, miso, matcha, isn't the real thing, stripped of the compounds that made it work. So processed it barely resembles what monks were eating 1,000 years ago. Here's what matters when you buy olive oil: look for a harvest date, not just an expiration date, and a single country of origin. Miso and natto: look for unpasteurized or live culture. Pasteurization kills the exact enzymes we've been talking about. Matcha: ceremonial grade, stone ground, bright green, not the dull, brownish stuff. Back to the list. We're just getting to the ones that'll genuinely surprise you. Number 10. Yak butter tea, fuel built for altitude, not for comfort. Tibetan monastics churn yak butter into strong black tea with salt to make pocha, sipped continuously throughout the day, not just at mealtimes. At elevations past 14,000 feet, this isn't a comfort drink, it's survival infrastructure, not a taste preference, a direct response to what high-altitude, cold-stress living demands from the body. Yak butter delivers an energy-dense mix of short and medium-chain saturated fats, plus high concentrations of CLA, conjugated linoleic acid, a compound shown to enhance mitochondrial fat oxidation and support lean muscle mass. At altitude, where hypoxic and cold stress spike energy demands, that rapid lipid assimilation provides the dense caloric output needed for non-shivering thermogenesis, your body generating heat without physically shaking, and for keeping cell membranes stable under oxygen-starved conditions. Traditional use: butter churned into hot black tea with a pinch of salt, sipped slowly and repeatedly through the day. If you're realizing how deliberate every single one of these choices was, hit that like button. It helps this video reach people who need to see it. Haven't subscribed? Do that now. Number 9. Natto, the fermented soybean that thins your blood while you sleep. Whole soybeans fermented with a specific bacterial strain, Bacillus subtilis var. Natto, a daily staple in Japanese Zen monastic kitchens. It looks strange, it smells stronger. Monks have eaten it anyway, for centuries, without knowing exactly why it mattered, not tolerated in spite of its strangeness, eaten because of what that fermentation actually produced. Natto's fermentation generates enormous amounts of vitamin K2, specifically MK7, a required cofactor for pulling calcium out of your arteries and pushing it into your bones, where it belongs, instead of hardening your blood vessels. But natto's real headline compound is nattokinase, a potent enzyme with direct fibrinolytic activity. It actively breaks down blood clots. Clinical research shows it degrades existing clots, reduces circulating clotting factors, and lowers both systolic and diastolic blood pressure. This is the food equivalent of a built-in defense against strokes and cardiac events, something modern medicine didn't isolate and name until the 1980s, centuries after monks were already eating it daily. Traditional use: a small serving of natto, stirred until sticky and stringy, mixed with a little soy sauce and mustard, eaten over rice, traditionally at breakfast. Natto got forgotten in the West because you can't patent a fermented soybean, and the texture scares people off before they learn what it does, but it's still doing exactly what it did 1,000 years ago. Number 8. Sideritis, the mountain tea royalty once fought wars over. Also known as ironwort or mountain tea, grows on high-altitude rocky slopes, consumed daily as a hot infusion by Greek Orthodox monastics on Mount Athos, not a luxury import, a plant that only grows where almost nothing else will, and monks built a daily ritual around it, not just a warming drink for cold mornings, chosen for a specific effect on the mind, one the monks needed for hours of meditation and prayer. Sideritis is loaded with active phenolic compounds: verbascicide, chlorogenic acid, apigenin. Verbascicide is a potent inhibitor of two enzymes that break down acetylcholine, your brain's primary neurotransmitter for memory and focus. Slow that breakdown, and you preserve acetylcholine levels longer, enhancing cerebral blood flow and cognitive performance. In aging research, sideritis extracts have been shown to boost the body's own antioxidant enzyme systems and improve visual attention and mental resilience under acute stress, the exact mechanism modern nootropic supplements are now trying to replicate synthetically. Traditional use: dried sideritis sprigs, steeped in just boiled water for 8 to 10 minutes, strained and drunk hot, once or twice daily. Number 7. Matcha, the tea monks drink to stay awake without ever feeling wired, a finely ground powder from shade-grown green tea leaves, central to Zen Buddhist practice for centuries, not just a beverage, but part of the ceremony around meditation itself. Monks didn't drink it for a caffeine jolt, they drank it for exactly how that caffeine behaved in the body, not ritual for ritual's sake. The way matcha is grown and consumed was chosen deliberately, and it produces a completely different effect than an ordinary cup of tea. Shading the tea plants before harvest boosts production of L-theanine and chlorophyll, and because matcha means consuming the entire ground leaf, not just a steeped bag, it delivers a dramatically higher concentration of EGCG, a polyphenol that crosses the blood-brain barrier, acting as a metal chelator and free radical scavenger, suppressing the same damaged proteins linked to cognitive decline. Meanwhile, L-theanine promotes alpha brainwave activity, the same state associated with relaxed, focused meditation, while lowering cortisol. That combination is why matcha produces alertness without the jittery crash of ordinary caffeine. Traditional use: whisked matcha powder in hot water, prepared fresh each time, not steeped and reheated, traditionally consumed before extended meditation. Number 6. Tsampa, the flour that turns into instant stable energy, a staple of the Tibetan monastic diet, whole-grain barley, roasted and ground into a fine shelf-stable flour, survives for months without refrigeration, in a place where refrigeration barely exists, not just a practical storage solution. The way barley behaves once it's inside the body is exactly why it became the foundation of the entire Tibetan monastic diet. Barley contains an exceptionally high concentration of a soluble fiber called beta-glucan. In the digestive tract, it forms a thick, high-viscosity gel that physically slows gastric emptying and delays carbohydrate absorption. A slow, stable release of glucose, not the sharp spikes and crashes of refined flour, repeated daily for decades, that protects metabolic flexibility as the body ages. Clinical studies also show regular barley beta-glucan intake lowers LDL cholesterol. The fiber binds directly to bile acids in the intestine, forcing the liver to pull cholesterol out of the bloodstream to make more. Traditional use: roasted barley flour, mixed directly with hot tea or yak butter tea into a dense, doughy paste, eaten by hand, no cooking required. Number 5. Black rice, the grain Shaolin monks trained on, traditionally called the black treasure by Shaolin monks. Not chosen at random, specifically selected to support high-intensity physical and martial training, the kind that would break down a body eating ordinary white rice day after day, not superstition wrapped around a rare-colored grain, a functional choice, tied directly to recovery and endurance. Black rice is exceptionally rich in anthocyanins, specifically cyanidin 3-glucoside, concentrated in the dark outer bran layer that gets stripped away in ordinary processed rice. These anthocyanins are potent antioxidants that directly protect the mitochondrial electron transport chain, the cellular machinery that produces energy, from oxidative damage. That protection is likely a major reason monks who trained hard on black rice showed faster recovery, more sustained energy, and better preserved aerobic capacity even into old age. Traditional use: black rice, soaked overnight, then steamed alongside or in place of white rice. The deep purple color intensifies as it cooks. Number 4. Genmai, the rice modern nutrition science had to relearn the value of. Unpolished, whole-grain brown rice, a daily staple across Japanese Zen monastic kitchens. Unlike white rice, nothing stripped away, the bran and germ layers stay fully intact. Not a lesser, unrefined version of real rice. This was the deliberate choice. White rice was the deviation, a shift that came later, for convenience, not health. By keeping the bran and germ intact, Genmai preserves rich concentrations of gamma-oryzanol, ferulic acid, and soluble fiber, all discarded in the polishing process that creates white rice. Gamma-oryzanol lowers plasma cholesterol by inhibiting how much your intestines absorb, while helping your liver clear LDL cholesterol from the bloodstream faster. Large clinical cohort studies tracking the shift from white rice to Genmai have linked it to a meaningfully lower risk of type 2 diabetes, largely by preventing the sharp insulin spikes that gradually exhaust the pancreas over decades. Traditional use: brown rice, soaked for several hours to soften the bran, then steamed as the base of nearly every meal. Number 3. Tofu, the protein source that quietly does a pharmaceutical's job. The primary protein foundation across East Asian Buddhist monasteries, coagulated soy, pressed into blocks, showing up in nearly every meal. In traditions where meat is strictly prohibited under the vow of non-violence, tofu isn't a substitute, it's the centerpiece. Not a workaround for what monks couldn't eat. A complete nutritional solution in its own right, one modern research is only now fully explaining. Tofu delivers a complete amino acid profile, rich in 2 soy proteins, glycinin and beta-conglycinin, shown to directly stimulate LDL receptor activity in the liver, accelerating how fast your body clears cholesterol-carrying particles from the blood. Tofu also contains isoflavones, genistein and digoxin, which act as weak selective estrogen receptor modulators, in practical terms, anti-inflammatory protection for blood vessel walls, and reduced bone loss in aging monastics, a combination most single foods can't offer at once. Traditional use: fresh tofu, lightly pressed to remove excess water, then simmered into broths or pan-seared with minimal seasoning, never over-processed, never fried in heavy batter. Number 2. Miso, the paste linked to living longer, one bowl at a time. A fermented paste made from soybeans, rice or barley, inoculated with a specific mold and left to ferment for months. Part of the Shojin Ryori tradition, shows up in monastic kitchens almost every single day, most often as soup, not just a flavor base for a daily meal, a functional food, repeated so consistently its effects had decades to compound. The long fermentation breaks complex soy proteins into highly bioavailable peptides and free amino acids, while producing melanoidins, the dark brown pigments behind miso's color. Melanoidins act as potent antioxidants, protecting the cells lining your blood vessels from lipid peroxidation, a form of cellular damage linked to cardiovascular disease. This isn't just theoretical. Longitudinal cohort studies tracking miso consumption in Japan have found regular intake is associated with a meaningful drop in all-cause mortality, driven primarily by lower cardiovascular disease risk. Traditional use: a spoonful of miso paste, dissolved into hot water or dashi just before serving, never boiled directly, that destroys the live cultures. If you're realizing how simple real longevity can be, hit that like button. It helps this video reach people who need to see it. Haven't subscribed? Do that now. And here we are, number 1, the one I saved for last, because it represents everything we've talked about today. Extra virgin olive oil, the liquid at the center of an entire way of eating. On Mount Athos, olive oil isn't just an ingredient, it's the primary lipid source for the entire Athonite diet, deliberately restricted on fasting days, creating a built-in cycle of abundance and restraint that runs all year, every year, for a monk's entire life, not a cooking preference. The foundation everything else on this list was built around, the fat that carried the polyphenols in the wild greens, that made the lentil soup nourishing instead of just filling, that turned simple bread into a complete meal. Extra virgin olive oil is exceptionally high in monounsaturated oleic acid, often over 70% of its total fat, alongside 3 phenolic compounds, oleuropein, hydroxytyrosol, and oleocanthal. Oleocanthal is a natural, non-selective cyclooxygenase inhibitor. It suppresses chronic inflammation through a mechanism that closely mirrors low-dose ibuprofen, except it arrives through food, several times a day, for a lifetime. But the real story is oleic acid's relationship with SIRT1, a NAD-dependent enzyme that activates some of the same pathways researchers are now targeting with experimental longevity compounds: DNA repair, mitochondrial biogenesis, mitochondrial quality control. This is functionally the same pathway modern anti-aging science is trying to switch on artificially. Monks have been switching it on with a spoon, every day, for over 1,000 years. And here's what ties the entire list together. Look at these 20 foods not as 20 separate items, but as one system. Each provides something the others lack. Olive oil is very often the delivery vehicle that makes the rest of it work. Oleocanthal quiets inflammation. Fucoidan in sea vegetables and polyphenols in wild greens do the same job through different mechanisms, 3 roads, same destination. Oleic acid activates SIRT1 for cellular repair. Lentils hit a related effect through methionine restriction and mTOR, different levers, same outcome. Hydroxytyrosol in pickled olives protects LDL from oxidation. Nattokinase works downstream of that, breaking down clots that do form. This is not one miracle food, it's 20 separate solutions, arriving at the same handful of biological outcomes from 20 different angles, not coincidence. Or if it is, it's the most precise, most repeated coincidence in the history of human nutrition. Traditional use: extra virgin olive oil, unheated where possible, poured generously over vegetables, legumes, and bread, the same way it's been used on that mountain for over 1,000 years. 20 foods, thousands of years of accumulated observation. Here's what I want you to take away. These people weren't primitive, they weren't guessing, they weren't just following ritual for ritual's sake. They were paying attention, closely, patiently, for generations. They watched what healed them and what sustained them, and built an entire way of life around it, long before anyone had a microscope to explain why. Now modern science, clinical trials, double-blind studies, biochemical analysis, keeps arriving at the exact same conclusions. Natto breaks down blood clots. Olive oil switches on the same cellular repair pathway anti-aging researchers are chasing today. Lentils trigger the same metabolic switch as caloric restriction. Sea vegetables calm inflammation at a molecular level. Shiitake recalibrates the immune system without overloading it. The tradition was right, it just didn't explain the mechanism, because for the people living it, the mechanism was never the point, the outcome was. Before I let you go, quality matters here. The difference between real extra virgin olive oil and what's on a regular grocery shelf isn't small. It's the difference between actually getting oleocanthal and SIRT1 activation and getting a bottle of flavorless oxidized fat with a fancy label. Same goes for miso, natto, matcha. Look past the marketing, check the harvest date, check for unpasteurized or live culture, check the origin. 5 extra seconds of reading a label is the difference between eating what monks actually ate and eating a diluted imitation of it. Which one surprised you the most? Team natto or Team olive oil? Leave a comment. Haven't subscribed yet? Hit that button, ring the bell, never miss what's coming next. We're just getting started. See you in the next one.